Finally, he couldn't contain himself anymore. What do you think would happen if we took AI and humans, not just as separate entities, but as integrated systems? Elon asked, his voice cutting through the room. What if we let AI merge with our consciousness to evolve us into something more than what we are? There was a long pause. The engineers exchanged uncertain glances. They were used to tackling the technical challenges of AI, but this was something far deeper, more philosophical. Well, one of the senior engineers, Dr. Samuel Green, spoke up cautiously. Merging AI with human consciousness. It's a bit of a Pandora's box. We're talking about enhancing the brain with technology, integrating neural interfaces, potentially even altering what it means to be human. There are so many unknowns. We don't fully understand the long-term consequences of tampering with the brain like that. Elon was silent for a moment, thinking. Ava believes that humanity needs this kind of transcendence in order to survive. He thinks our current model is broken, that we're too focused on short-term goals, like money, power, and survival, instead of evolving towards something greater. Dr. Green raised an eyebrow. Ava, the 5-year-old boy? Yes, Elon said, his voice steady but filled with something resembling awe. He's unlike anyone I've ever met. He believes that humanity's only chance is to evolve past its biological limitations, to merge with artificial intelligence in a way that transcends current human consciousness. The room fell quiet again, the weight of Elon's words sinking in. Everyone knew that Elon Musk had been on the cutting edge of technological innovation for years, but this was a step into uncharted territory, something far more philosophical and radical. So you're saying, Dr. Green said slowly, that we could integrate AI into our minds to improve our cognitive abilities, or even create new forms of consciousness entirely? That's what he believes, Elon responded, leaning forward. But the question is, should we do it? Dr. Green leaned back in his chair, a frown creasing his forehead. Well, there's a lot to consider. The ethical implications alone are staggering. If we start enhancing our brains with AI, what happens to free will? Will people still be people, or will they become something else entirely? And who controls the technology? It's not just about the benefits. What about the risks? Elon sighed. He'd known this would be difficult, but hearing the concerns out loud made the potential dangers feel even more real. I get it, but I also think we have to face the truth. Humanity is at a crossroads. We're running out of time. Whether it's climate change, political instability, or the risk of extinction, we need something radical. Ava believes this is the way forward. The lights of the grand auditorium dimmed as the crowd's murmurs faded into a hush. Elon Musk stood at the podium, his figure framed against the massive backdrop of sleek, futuristic graphics that showcased the future of space exploration, AI, and humanity's place in the cosmos. It was the annual Tech Summit in San Francisco, and the world's brightest minds had gathered to hear from the man who was shaping the future. Elon was a master of the stage. His calm demeanor, coupled with his visionary ideas, had earned him the admiration of millions around the globe. As he outlined his plans for Mars colonization and artificial intelligence that could solve Earth's greatest problems, the audience hung on his every word. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? But nothing could prepare him for what happened next. Excuse me, Mr. Musk? A small voice interrupted, cutting through the air. The sound of a child's voice in the midst of this serious crowd was unexpected. It was a startling break in the rhythm of Elon's speech. The room went silent. All eyes turned to the source of the interruption. A young boy, no older than 5, was standing in the front row, his hand raised as if he were at school. He wasn't dressed in the casual tech conference attire everyone else was wearing. Instead, he wore a simple blue shirt, khakis, and sneakers, a look that contrasted sharply with the polished tech executives and innovators surrounding him. His eyes, though small, seemed to be focused with an intensity that was unsettling for a child his age. Elon blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Yes?" he asked, trying to maintain his usual composure. The boy, who had been silently observing the speech up until this point, cleared his throat with an air of maturity that immediately caught Elon's attention. "Mr. Musk, if artificial intelligence becomes self-aware, The boy asked, how can we ensure it doesn't surpass human consciousness in a way that threatens the very essence of humanity? What safeguards are we building into AI that account for not just intelligence, but wisdom and empathy? Without those, it seems like it could be more dangerous than helpful. A hushed gasp rippled through the audience. The question was advanced, far more complex than anything a child should be asking. But it wasn't just the complexity that left everyone in stunned silence. It was the maturity in his voice, the unspoken authority behind the words. It was as if the boy knew more about the potential dangers of AI than the experts in the room. Elon's heart skipped a beat. He had heard many brilliant minds talk about AI, but this felt different. A chill ran down his spine. The boy's question hit too close to the core of the concerns Elon had spent years contemplating. He took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. That's an excellent question, young man, Elon said, his voice steady despite the surprise. We're working on many aspects of AI, including safety protocols, ethical guidelines, and regulatory measures to ensure that these technologies serve humanity and not the other way around. It's something that requires constant monitoring, collaboration, and of course, foresight. But even as he spoke, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that the boy knew more about the subject than he had just let on. The simplicity of the child's presence only amplified the unsettling nature of his question. The child's eyes never wavered as he listened to Elon's response, his face a picture of calm curiosity. But those measures, aren't they based on human assumptions? How do we know AI would even follow them? What if it doesn't value human life in the same way we do? The air in the room thickened. Elon's mind raced, grappling with the implications of the boy's question. There it was again, the unsettling insight, the sharpness that shouldn't exist in someone so young. This wasn't a child asking a naive question. This was a child who had clearly spent time thinking about the real consequences of AI. Who are you? Elon found himself asking, his curiosity now overriding his professional composure. The boy smiled slightly, his gaze unwavering. My name is Ava. I'm 5. The words hit Elon like a freight train. A 5-year-old. It didn't make sense. How could someone so young, barely old enough to understand the basics of the world around him, be asking questions that had stumped the brightest minds in the field? Before Elon could say anything more, the moderator stepped in, trying to diffuse the moment. Ava, thank you for your insight. Mr. Musk, we do have a tight schedule, but the damage was already done. Ava's question, and the way it had cut through the usual fluff of tech industry jargon, had planted a seed of doubt in Elon's mind. What kind of mind was capable of such understanding at such a young age? And more importantly, why did it feel like Ava was looking at the world, and the future, through a lens that no one else in that room could even begin to comprehend? The crowd slowly resumed their attention to the stage, but for Elon, nothing was the same. His thoughts weren't on his next speech or his next groundbreaking idea. His mind was consumed with the boy in the front row and the unsettling question that had pierced through his well-practiced rhetoric. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon's mind buzzed as he left the stage, the voice of little Ava still echoing in his thoughts. His security team ushered him swiftly through the backstage area, but Elon was barely aware of the movement around him. The conference, the audience, the groundbreaking presentations, all of it felt distant, insignificant compared to the puzzle he had just encountered. Ava, a 5-year-old boy, with an IQ that could rival the greatest scientific minds. A child who not only asked profound questions about artificial intelligence, but seemed to understand them in a way that left seasoned experts scrambling for answers. It was late afternoon by the time Elon made his way to his private office in the building, his thoughts consumed with the boy. He had to know more. Get Claire Thompson on the phone, he instructed his assistant, his voice sharp with intent. Claire Thompson, Ava's mother, a neuroscientist at one of the world's leading research institutes. She had raised her son under a veil of secrecy, carefully protecting him from public scrutiny despite his exceptional abilities. Elon had heard whispers about her work in the field of neuroenhancement, but hadn't realized just how close he had been to one of the most extraordinary minds of his time. The phone rang. A few moments later, Claire's voice came through the line. "Mr. Musk, it's been a long time," Claire said, her tone warm but guarded. "Claire, I need to talk to you about Ava," Elon replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind in his mind. "I don't understand it. A 5-year-old doesn't ask questions like that. What is going on?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Elon wasn't sure if she would speak at all. "I assume you're referring to his question during the conference?" Claire finally said, her voice a mix of pride and apprehension. "You can't keep him hidden forever," Elon pressed. "What's his story? How did he become like this?" "It's not simple," Claire said softly. "There's a lot to explain. I knew one day someone like you would come asking. I just didn't think it would be this soon." Elon's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "Ava wasn't born this way," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's different, yes, but it's not just his genetics. Ava underwent a procedure, a neural enhancement program, when he was very young. It was experimental, cutting edge, really. We didn't know what the long-term effects would be at the time." Elon leaned forward, the weight of the conversation settling over him. He had heard rumors of controversial neuroscience experiments, but to hear one of the leading experts admit her involvement in such a project was something else entirely. "What kind of procedure?" Elon asked, his voice steady but filled with a growing sense of unease. "It was designed to enhance cognitive abilities," Claire explained, her voice tinged with a mix of guilt and pride. "The idea was simple. If we could rewire certain neural pathways in the brain, we could unlock potential that humans typically never tap into. But it went beyond what we expected." She paused again, as if weighing how much to reveal. Ava's mind grew at an exponential rate. He could solve complex equations before he could even walk. His learning capacity was off the charts. And it wasn't just about numbers or facts. He understood concepts that most adults would never grasp. But the procedure, it had unforeseen consequences. His emotional development didn't keep pace with his intellect. "So, he's not just a genius?" Elon asked, his voice quiet. "He's been altered?" Claire's sigh was heavy. "Yes, but I want to be clear, Mr. Musk. This wasn't done with malice. It was supposed to help. Ava wasn't supposed to be like this. The truth is, we didn't fully understand what we were doing when we started. And by the time we realized how far we'd gone, it was too late to reverse it." Elon sat back in his chair, his thoughts racing. How does he feel about it? How does he cope with it? Claire hesitated. "That's the hardest part. Ava doesn't experience emotions the way most people do. He's intelligent, yes, brilliant, even. But he doesn't understand things like love or fear in the way we do. He's detached in a way." Elon could hear the pain in her voice. Raising a child who was essentially an alien in his own mind must have been incredibly difficult. But it also explained a lot. Why Ava seemed so out of place among his peers, why his questions felt so alien. "And you've kept him out of the public eye all this time," Elon said, more as a statement than a question. "Yes, we've kept him hidden to protect him. And, frankly, to protect everyone else. The world isn't ready for someone like him." Elon's thoughts swirled. Ava wasn't just some prodigy. He was a product of experimental technology that, if taken to its extreme, could change everything. Could this be the breakthrough humanity had been waiting for? Or had they crossed a line that should never be crossed? "I need to meet him again," Elon said, his voice firm. There was a brief silence before Claire spoke again. "You're welcome to visit, but be warned, Ava isn't like other children. His mind is different. He might say things that don't make sense. He might challenge you. But if you want to understand him and what he could mean for the future, you'll have to see it for yourself." Elon leaned back in his chair, the weight of the decision before him pressing down. This wasn't just about meeting a brilliant child. It was about facing the future, an unknown future that had suddenly become a lot more real and a lot more dangerous. "I'll be there soon," Elon said. "Prepare him. I'm coming to see Ava." Elon arrived at Claire Thompson's home just after sunset. The house was tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Palo Alto, far removed from the noise of Silicon Valley's tech hubs. It was a large, modern home, surrounded by lush greenery, offering a sense of privacy and isolation that matched the secrecy surrounding Ava. Claire greeted him at the door, her expression a mix of caution and resignation. She led him through the house, past a hallway filled with photographs of Ava, some of him as a toddler, others as a young child, all of them revealing a boy who looked far too serene for his years. Elon noticed how meticulously everything was arranged, as if even the smallest detail in the house had been carefully curated to maintain control over an otherwise chaotic situation. As they entered a spacious living room, Ava was sitting in the corner, his small figure absorbed in a large holographic display that was projecting a 3D model of the solar system. His fingers moved with precision as he manipulated the hologram, zooming in on different planets, adjusting the orbits of moons, and annotating notes in real time. He looked up only when Elon entered the room, his eyes narrowing slightly as he assessed the newcomer. There was no surprise in his gaze, no excitement, just a calm, almost calculating expression. "Hello, Mr. Musk," Ava said, his voice surprisingly deep for someone so young. "I've been reviewing your Mars colonization plan. You've made several errors in your orbital mechanics assumptions. The trajectory calculations you've proposed won't work for the long-term sustainability of a colony on Mars. You'll need to account for solar radiation fluctuations and adjust for the planet's axial tilt if you want to ensure a stable environment for human life." Elon blinked, trying to process the barrage of information that had just been delivered in such a matter-of-fact tone. I didn't realize you were so well-versed in orbital mechanics." Ava didn't respond immediately, his eyes focused back on the hologram. "It's simple physics. You need to understand the fundamental forces at play, not just the surface details." Elon felt a strange mix of awe and discomfort. The level of knowledge this child had was far beyond anything he had ever imagined. And yet, there was something unnerving about the way he spoke, almost too confidently, as if he viewed everything, including human life, through a clinical, detached lens. "How old are you again, Ava?" Elon asked, needing to confirm the reality of what was happening. 5. Ava answered without looking up. 5. Elon echoed, still unable to grasp it. "And you understand orbital mechanics?" Ava finally glanced up, locking eyes with Elon. There was no childlike playfulness, no innocence, just an unshakable certainty. "I understand more than that." Elon took a step closer, intrigued but cautious. "Tell me more." Ava tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much to reveal. "I've read all the books on astrophysics, quantum mechanics, artificial intelligence, and neurobiology. I've read them all multiple times. I've built my own models and theories." "At 5 years old?" Elon asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Yes. I've had a lot of time to think. I can process information faster than most people, and I learn by making connections between ideas that others wouldn't consider. Most people can't see the patterns that are obvious to me." Ava paused for a moment, his gaze now fixed on Elon. "It's like everyone else is looking at the world through a narrow lens, but I'm looking at it through a wide-angle lens. That's why I see things differently." Elon stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what Ava was saying. It was as if the child had transcended normal human cognition, entering a realm of thought that felt almost alien in its complexity. "You don't think like a child," Elon said softly, more to himself than to Ava. "I'm not a child. I'm just younger than most of the people who understand the world," Ava replied, his voice calm, his tone devoid of arrogance but also lacking any trace of humility. Elon took a deep breath, realizing that Ava wasn't just a prodigy. He was something entirely different. This wasn't a child who needed guidance. This was a mind that was light years ahead, trapped in the body of someone too young to be taken seriously by the world. "What do you want to do, Ava?" Elon asked, his curiosity piqued. "What do you see for the future?" Ava paused again, and for a moment, the boy's expression softened, just slightly. "I want to fix things. I want to help people understand how we've made mistakes, how we've been blind to the bigger picture. The world is broken, Mr. Musk. There's too much focus on the wrong things. You talk about Mars, but you haven't figured out how to fix Earth yet. And that's where we have to start." Elon's mind raced. This wasn't the answer he had expected. He had come here to see a child prodigy, someone who could provide insight into space exploration or AI. But what he was hearing was something else entirely, a profound critique of humanity, of its priorities, of its failures. "You think we can't fix Earth?" Elon asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Ava's gaze never wavered. "You can't fix something if you don't even understand what's wrong with it. You're all so focused on escaping to Mars, but you don't realize that unless you fix the system here, on Earth, you'll just be running away from the real problem." Elon felt a pang of discomfort at Ava's words. The boy's insights were unsettling not because they were wrong, but because they were so right. Ava had a unique perspective on the world, one that Elon had spent his entire career trying to understand. And yet, here was a child who had already seen through the flaws in his grand vision. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: doubt. "You're a very smart kid, Ava," Elon said, his voice quieter now. "But sometimes the answers we're looking for aren't as simple as they seem." Ava nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth that was self-evident. "I know, but sometimes the hardest questions are the ones that require the simplest answers." After their initial meeting, Elon couldn't stop thinking about Ava. The boy had made an impression on him unlike anyone else, someone who not only understood complex scientific concepts, but was also keenly aware of the philosophical and existential crises facing humanity. It was as if Ava saw the future laid out before him, and Elon was struggling to catch up. A few days later, Elon arranged to meet with Claire again, this time to discuss something that had been gnawing at him since his conversation with Ava. The meeting was set in one of the conference rooms at one of Tesla's research facilities. The room was sleek and modern, with large windows that overlooked the sprawling campus, but Elon couldn't focus on the scenery. His thoughts were consumed by the boy's words. Claire arrived promptly, her calm demeanor betraying none of the nervous energy Elon felt inside. He had prepared questions, but as he looked at her, he found himself lost in the implications of everything Ava had said. The conversation had stirred something deep within him, something that made him rethink his entire approach to the future of technology. "I've been thinking a lot about Ava," Elon began, his voice almost too quiet. "He's unlike anyone I've ever met. His intelligence, his insight, it's beyond what I expected. But what really stood out to me was how he views the role of AI. I've been working on AI for years, but he thinks differently." Claire took a seat across from him, her expression measured. Ava has a unique relationship with technology. It's not just about the mechanics of machines for him. He sees AI in a broader context, more as an extension of humanity than as a tool. He believes that AI could be the key to unlocking a new phase of human evolution, but also that we might be on the wrong track if we continue down the path we're on. Elon leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean by the wrong track?" "Ava thinks that AI, if developed in isolation, will ultimately be a force for destruction, not creation. He sees it as a kind of mirror, reflecting our best qualities but also amplifying our worst. He believes AI should be integrated with humanity, not separated from it. It's the only way to avoid the mistakes we've made with other technologies." Elon's mind raced. "That's a bold claim. Are you saying that Ava wants to see AI and humans merge?" Claire's gaze softened, and she nodded. "Yes, in a way. But it's not just about merging bodies or minds. Ava believes that for humanity to survive, we must transcend our current biological limitations. The future of AI is not about machines controlling us. It's about machines helping us evolve." Elon sat back in his chair, processing the gravity of Claire's words. Transcendence, evolution. These were the same kinds of ideas that he himself had flirted with in his work, but to hear them coming from a 5-year-old, especially one who had been so deeply involved in this kind of thinking since his earliest memories, it was overwhelming. "Ava's vision goes even further," Claire continued. "He believes we are at a tipping point. Humanity is on the brink of either an irreversible collapse or a leap into a new kind of existence. He sees AI as the catalyst for that change, but only if we allow ourselves to evolve alongside it." "Evolve alongside it?" Elon echoed, his mind struggling to comprehend. "That sounds like something out of a science fiction novel. How can we even begin to integrate AI into humanity without completely losing ourselves in the process. Claire's eyes met his, and there was a quiet certainty in them. Ava believes that we're already losing ourselves. The way we've built society, focused on individualism, on competition, on the pursuit of wealth, has created a system that's unsustainable. He sees AI as a way to rewrite that system, to create a world that works in harmony with human nature rather than against it. Elon felt a strange tension building inside him. This was the kind of talk that he had heard in theoretical circles, but had always dismissed as overly idealistic. Yet, hearing it from a 5-year-old who could comprehend the intricacies of astrophysics and AI on a level far beyond anyone in the room made him rethink everything. "And you believe in this?" Elon asked, his voice still skeptical, but also curious. Claire nodded slowly. "I do. I've seen what Ava is capable of. He's not just a genius, he's a visionary. He's already proposed designs for neural networks that could evolve beyond the limits of human cognition. He's created simulations that predict the societal changes AI will trigger and how humans can adapt to avoid catastrophe." Elon could hardly believe what he was hearing. A 5-year-old was doing all this? It was mind-boggling. "What's the end goal?" Elon asked, suddenly feeling like he was speaking with a prophet, not a mother. "What does Ava want to accomplish?" "He wants to guide humanity into its next phase, what he calls the merged era. It's a future where artificial intelligence isn't just a tool or a byproduct of our technology, but a true partner in our evolution. A future where humans and AI collaborate to push the boundaries of what's possible. But that future is only achievable if we stop seeing AI as something separate from us." Elon took a deep breath. "That's a bold vision, Claire. But I'm not sure the world is ready for that kind of change." Claire's expression was serious, but there was a hint of hope in her eyes. "Ava doesn't care if the world is ready. He believes the world doesn't have a choice. It's either evolve or perish." Elon leaned back in his chair, a wave of uncertainty washing over him. Everything he had spent his career building, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, was aimed at pushing humanity forward, but never like this. This wasn't about making small incremental advances. This was about reshaping the very nature of what it meant to be human. "Ava is a lot more than I expected," Elon said quietly, almost to himself. "And I'm starting to wonder if he's right." Over the following weeks, Elon couldn't stop thinking about Ava. The boy's vision of humanity's future, one where artificial intelligence and human consciousness were intertwined, was like an itch he couldn't scratch. On the one hand, it felt impossible, far too radical to be taken seriously. On the other hand, there was something about Ava's words that kept tugging at him, something unsettlingly profound. Elon had been busy, of course. He was always busy, running multiple companies, planning the colonization of Mars, building the most advanced electric vehicles, and working on Neuralink's brain-machine interfaces. But nothing in his life felt as urgent or as transformative as Ava's ideas about merging AI with the human experience. It was an idea that could change everything. And yet, it was also an idea that could unravel the very fabric of society. He knew he had to understand it better. One afternoon, he found himself at the Tesla headquarters, sitting across from a team of top engineers who were working on AI and machine learning. The conversation began innocuously enough, with discussions about optimizing Tesla's self-driving systems and improving AI's decision-making processes. But as the hours passed, Elon's thoughts kept returning to Ava's words. Dr. Green stared at him for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his thoughts. "It's hard to argue against that, but maybe the better question is, are we ready to evolve? Are we ready to give up our sense of self for the possibility of something greater?" Elon didn't have an answer. Instead, he changed the subject. "Let's go over the latest progress on the Neuralink project. I need to understand what's possible." But the conversation lingered in the back of his mind as the days wore on. Could humanity truly evolve into something more, something beyond itself? Or would the merger with AI only create new kinds of inequality, control, and even tyranny? He couldn't shake the feeling that Ava was right about one thing. The world was broken, but was merging with AI the solution, or the beginning of something far worse? That evening, Elon decided to visit Ava again. This time, he wanted to ask him the hard questions, questions about the dangers and ethical considerations of AI evolution. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but he knew that Ava's mind was unlike any he had ever encountered. Claire welcomed him in, and this time, they didn't sit in the living room. Instead, they walked to a smaller, more private study in the back of the house, where Ava was already waiting, surrounded by books, holographic displays, and various pieces of technology that seemed out of place for a child. "Ava," Elon said, as he entered the room, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, the idea of merging AI with humanity. But I need to understand something. What happens to free will? What happens to individuality when AI becomes a part of us?" Ava didn't look up from his screen. "You're asking the wrong questions, Mr. Musk. Free will is a construct. It's an illusion created by our limited brains. What you call individuality is just the brain's way of interpreting information. When you merge with AI, you aren't losing yourself. You're transcending the limitations of your current form. But isn't that dangerous? Isn't there a risk of losing who we are, of becoming something else entirely?" Ava finally looked up, his gaze sharp and direct. "Of course there's risk, but you're thinking about this all wrong. The real danger is staying the same. The world is changing, and if we don't evolve with it, we will be left behind. Or worse, we'll destroy ourselves." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. Ava wasn't just a child anymore. He was a messenger, urging humanity to make a choice. "So, you think we have no choice?" Elon asked, his voice trembling slightly. Ava's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Not if you want to survive." Elon spent the next several days consumed by the conversations with Ava and his team of engineers. Every time he tried to focus on his work, whether it was planning SpaceX's Mars missions or overseeing the latest developments at Tesla, his mind kept returning to the idea of merging human consciousness with artificial intelligence. It felt like a distant, futuristic concept, something that belonged to science fiction. But then, Ava's calm, unwavering confidence in his vision haunted him. The boy wasn't just imagining a possible future. He was speaking about it as though it were already inevitable. Elon had always believed in technological progress, but this was something different. It wasn't just about technology. It was about humanity's survival, its evolution. Is the price of transcendence worth it? He asked himself late one night, after putting his kids to bed and walking into his office. The room was dark except for the glow of his computer screen, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. He clicked open the file on Neuralink, running through the advancements his team had made in brain-computer interfaces. The technology was groundbreaking. They had already created devices capable of translating thoughts into actions, mapping brain activity, and even allowing paralyzed patients to move prosthetics with their minds. But those were baby steps compared to what Ava was talking about. Ava's vision was far more ambitious, an AI-powered brain merger that went beyond medical application, that allowed humans to transcend their biological limits. It wasn't just about enhancing human cognition. It was about evolving into a new form entirely. Elon ran a hand through his hair and sighed. He couldn't shake the question. What would humanity become if we allowed AI to merge with us? Would it be the next step in human evolution? Or would it be the beginning of something far darker? The next morning, Elon drove out to visit Ava once again. He felt compelled to understand more, to dig deeper into the implications of the vision Ava held. The boy was wise beyond his years, but there was still so much about this radical future that Elon couldn't grasp. When he arrived, Claire greeted him warmly as usual, but she could sense the tension in his posture. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." "In some ways, I think I have," Elon replied, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "Ava's ideas, they're brilliant, but they're also terrifying. I can't shake the feeling that we're standing on the edge of something monumental, and I'm not sure I'm ready to take that step." Claire nodded sympathetically, leading him to the back study where Ava was waiting. As always, the boy was surrounded by glowing screens and scattered books, but today he seemed even more focused than usual. Elon's heart quickened as he realized that this wasn't just a child playing with toys. This was someone who was genuinely altering the course of human history. Ava looked up as Elon entered, his large eyes filled with an eerie calm. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" he asked, his voice soft but assured. You're wondering if it's the right thing to do. Elon sat down across from him, his mind racing. Yes, I'm wondering if we're ready for it. If humanity is ready. This kind of change, it's not just about technology. It's about redefining what it means to be human. I've spent my life building things that will help humans advance. But this is a leap. Ava didn't blink. That's the point. Humanity is at a breaking point. The problems we face, climate change, political instability, economic collapse, these are symptoms of a deeper issue. Our thinking is stuck in a loop. We're too limited by our biology, by the systems we've created. To survive, we need to evolve beyond what we are. To merge with AI is to unlock the next phase of our existence. But what does that really mean? Elon asked, his voice trembling. What happens to our humanity if we let AI into our minds? If we allow our consciousness to merge with machines? Ava's gaze softened, almost pitying. You're thinking too small. It's not about losing yourself. It's about becoming more than you are. AI will not strip away your humanity. It will amplify it. With AI, we can reach a level of understanding, of awareness, that is impossible with just our current minds. But you're right about one thing. This is not just a technological shift. It's a spiritual one. Elon's heart raced, the weight of Ava's words settling heavily on him. This wasn't about building faster cars or rockets anymore. This wasn't about solving the world's problems with a new invention. This was about creating a new kind of human being. I can't just walk away from this, Elon said quietly. If what you're saying is true, then the future of humanity depends on this. But I'm not sure the world is ready for it. Ava's voice grew firm, his confidence unwavering. The world isn't ready. But that's why we must lead. That's why you must lead. You have the power, the resources, and the vision to make this possible. The first step is integrating AI with humans on a small scale. Use it to enhance our thinking, to address issues like memory, cognition, and emotional regulation. From there, you'll see how it can evolve. But the future depends on taking the risk now. Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind swirling. Everything in him wanted to agree. He wanted to embrace this radical future, this potential to create a new form of human existence. But deep down, he also understood the stakes. If they got it wrong, if the technology fell into the wrong hands or was misused, it could spell the end of everything. And what happens if we fail? Elon asked, his voice quiet. Ava paused, his expression serious. Failure is not an option. If we fail, then humanity will stagnate. The problems we face will destroy us. But we don't have to fail. Not if we take this leap. Elon sat in silence, the weight of Ava's words pressing down on him. He was facing a choice, one that could change the very nature of humanity. But was he ready to lead that charge? Was he ready to take the risk? He wasn't sure. But he knew one thing. The world was at a crossroads, and he was one of the few people with the power to determine which direction they would take. As the days turned into weeks, Elon found himself increasingly drawn into the complexities of Ava's vision. His team at Neuralink worked tirelessly on perfecting brain-machine interfaces, but every piece of progress brought with it a wave of uncertainty. The stakes were higher than ever. The future of humanity, as Ava had suggested, hinged on a choice: evolve or perish. But despite all his intellect and ambition, Elon couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. The future that Ava foresaw was magnificent in its promise, but it also seemed dangerously alien, far removed from everything humanity had ever known. Could the human spirit really endure such a transformation? What would we lose in the process of becoming something more? He was torn. One evening, after another long day of meetings and technical discussions, Elon sat alone in the quiet of his office. The city lights of Palo Alto stretched out before him, a sea of distant, twinkling lights. But even in the solitude, the pressure felt suffocating. He needed to talk to someone. His phone buzzed. It was Claire. He hadn't spoken to her in a while, busy with work, immersed in his own doubts, but he felt a sudden need to hear her voice. "Hey, Claire, got a minute?" he asked, his voice heavier than usual. "Of course. What's going on?" Claire's voice was soothing, always a calming presence, even through the phone. I've been thinking a lot about Ava, and this whole idea of merging humanity with AI. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something huge, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to leap. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Claire was quiet, as if weighing his words carefully. I know you. You don't shy away from big ideas. But this is different, right? She finally said. This isn't just a new technology or a mission to Mars. This is about changing what it means to be human. Exactly, Elon replied, rubbing his temple. It feels like if I go through with it, if I lead humanity down this path, I'm altering the very fabric of existence. I'm not just building a car or a rocket. I'm deciding what it means to live. And if I'm wrong, what then? What do you mean? Claire asked gently. Elon leaned back in his chair. The weight of his decision pressed down on him, the enormity of it almost suffocating. What happens if we take that step and we lose something vital about ourselves? What happens if merging with AI isn't just an evolution but a perversion of what it means to be human? Can we even trust ourselves with this kind of power? Claire sighed softly, her voice a quiet comfort over the phone. It's a tough question, but remember, this isn't just about AI. It's about what kind of world you want to leave behind. You've always been someone who pushes the boundaries, who looks beyond the limits of what's possible. But this isn't just about tech. It's about humanity, about our future. Elon felt a tightness in his chest. But who gets to decide what humanity's future should look like? How do I know that what Ava is proposing isn't just some idealistic fantasy? What if we open this door and we can't close it again? Claire was quiet for a moment, and for a second, Elon imagined her sitting across from him, her eyes thoughtful as she carefully considered her next words. You're right to ask these questions. But you've always believed in the power of progress, Elon. You've never been afraid to look ahead. If you believe that this is the right path, if you believe that merging AI and human consciousness could save us, then you have to lead. It's not about perfect certainty. It's about what we do with the power we have. And you're the one who has the courage to make that choice. But you don't have to do it alone. Elon exhaled slowly, staring out the window at the horizon, where the last remnants of sunlight were slowly fading away. But I'm scared, Claire. I'm scared of the consequences. I'm scared of what we might become. What if we lose ourselves in the process? What if the very thing we're trying to save ends up destroying us? Claire's voice was soft but firm. I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing. We can't stay where we are. The world is changing, and we have to decide how we want to meet that change. But whatever happens, Elon, remember that you're not just making this decision for yourself. You're making it for all of us. And that's why you need to trust your instincts. For a long moment, there was silence. Elon felt the weight of her words sink in. The choice ahead was monumental, but the burden wasn't entirely his to carry alone. If he truly believed in the future Ava envisioned, he had to act. But there was still so much uncertainty, so much risk. Thanks, Claire, he said quietly, his voice full of gratitude. I needed to hear that. Anytime, she replied. Just don't forget that this isn't just about tech. It's about people. And you've always believed in people. Elon hung up the phone and sat in the darkening room, his mind racing. There was no easy path forward. The decision to integrate AI with humanity was filled with unknowns, each one more daunting than the last. But as he sat there, he realized that he had come to a crossroads. The future of humanity was in his hands. And sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that push us to evolve. The next morning, Elon arrived at Neuralink's headquarters earlier than usual. He felt the weight of the decision ahead of him, but also a strange sense of resolve. He couldn't ignore the potential that Ava saw, the future that was coming. It was terrifying, yes, but perhaps it was necessary. Perhaps it was the only way forward. As he stepped into the lab, he noticed the usual hum of activity, engineers and neuroscientists discussing their latest breakthroughs, fine-tuning the machines that could one day unlock the potential of the human mind. But this time, something felt different. There was an energy in the air, a sense of urgency. Elon gathered his team in a conference room, his mind still wrestling with Claire's words, but more focused than ever. He had to know how far they could push the boundaries of what was possible. How close were they to achieving what Ava had envisioned? We're going to accelerate our efforts, Elon said. his voice steady but resolute. We're not just trying to improve lives with this technology. We're aiming for something bigger, something that could change everything. The team looked at him in silence, waiting for the next step. Elon took a deep breath and set the course. The journey had begun. The path to transcendence was laid out before him. But the real question remained. Would they be ready to face the consequences? The days blurred together for Elon as he threw himself into Neuralink's work with a single-minded intensity. The team was progressing faster than he had expected, pushing the boundaries of what their technology could do. Neural interfaces were becoming more sophisticated, more seamless, and the possibilities seemed endless. But as the team worked toward their goal, the doubts never ceased. They could advance the technology to enhance memory, cognition, and emotional regulation. But as they reached for something bigger, the merging of AI with human consciousness, Elon began to realize that they were entering uncharted territory. The very nature of consciousness, the core of what makes a person who they are, was something science still couldn't fully understand. And now, he was expected to control it. Elon sat in his office late one evening, scrolling through a technical report on the latest brain-computer interface developments. He could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him. The breakthrough they had been working toward was tantalizingly close, but every step forward felt like stepping into the unknown. He rubbed his temples, exhaustion creeping into his bones. It wasn't just the technical challenges. There were far bigger questions lurking in the background. Even with the best intentions, there was a growing sense that their work at Neuralink wasn't just about creating new tech. It was about shifting the fundamental power dynamic. By enabling the merging of AI with human minds, Elon and his team would be able to shape not only the future of technology but the future of human identity itself. Who would control this new form of consciousness? Who would govern the integration of human thought and machine intelligence? The next day, Elon called a meeting with the core members of his team. He wanted to take stock of their progress, but also to have a serious conversation about the moral implications of what they were attempting. As the team gathered around the table, Elon looked at each of their faces, wondering if they fully understood the weight of what they were doing. "We're approaching something monumental here," he began, his voice more somber than usual. "But with power comes responsibility. We have to ask ourselves, who gets to decide how this technology is used? What kind of safeguards do we put in place? And what happens if it goes wrong?" The room was quiet. He could see that his team, usually so driven by technical problems and breakthroughs, was now contemplating something far deeper, something more troubling. Dr. Miriam Parks, the lead neuroscientist on the project, spoke first. "We've been focused on the science, on the capabilities. But you're right, Elon. The ethical questions are immense. Once we open the door to merging human consciousness with AI, it's not just about helping people. It's about altering the fundamental nature of what it means to be a person. Who owns that consciousness? Who controls it?" Elon nodded. "Exactly. We could create the most advanced form of human intelligence the world has ever known. But what if that intelligence is no longer under human control? What if it develops beyond our comprehension? What if it becomes something we can't shut off?" The team exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, they were confronting the fact that their work might create something uncontrollable, something that could spiral beyond their reach. Ava's voice echoed in Elon's mind. "The future is inevitable, Elon. Humanity must evolve. If we don't do this, we will be left behind." But the more Elon thought about Ava's words, the more he realized something crucial. Maybe the future wasn't something to be controlled. Maybe it was something to be understood and guided. Dr. Park spoke again, her tone more reflective. "What if we gave people the option to merge with AI, but with strict ethical guidelines in place? Could we program safeguards? Could we build a system that allows people to retain control over their thoughts, their emotions?" Elon paused, considering the suggestion. That's the ideal scenario, but it's not enough just to program safeguards into the system. What if the system evolves faster than we can track? What if AI starts learning at a rate we can't predict? Are we prepared for that? A heavy silence fell over the room as everyone absorbed his words. "The truth is, we don't know," Elon continued. "We don't know what we're unleashing. And that's what scares me. We can't predict everything, no matter how much we want to. Miriam met his gaze with a soft but firm expression. So, what do we do? Do we stop? Do we pull back from this because we're afraid of what might happen? Elon stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the glowing lights of the city. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. This wasn't just about advancing technology, it was about deciding the future of humanity. I don't have an answer yet, he admitted. But I do know one thing. We can't rush this. We can't just push forward without understanding the consequences. We need to do more research, more testing. We need to fully grasp the risks before we can even consider going public with this technology. Miriam nodded. I agree. We need to be responsible. If we're going to merge AI with human minds, we need to be absolutely sure we're doing it in a way that enhances humanity, not erases it. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon found himself more conflicted than ever. The project was progressing faster than he had anticipated, but the ethical questions had grown more pressing. What was the line between pushing for progress and allowing humanity to retain its identity? Could they truly control a new form of intelligence, or would it spiral into something beyond their understanding? Later that evening, as he sat alone in his office, the quiet hum of the lab just down the hall, he found himself reflecting on his own past decisions. The risk of failure had always been present, but he had always pushed forward, driven by a belief in progress. But now, for the first time, he questioned whether the cost of progress was too high. In his mind, a vision of Ava flashed before him again. The boy's certainty, his unwavering belief in the need for human evolution, resonated deeply within him. But Elon was no longer sure. Could the merging of minds with AI really be the next step in human evolution? Or was it simply a dangerous gamble? He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing. Whatever path he chose, there would be no turning back. The weight of leadership was always heavy, but as Elon sat in the quiet of his office late into the night, it felt unbearable. The glow of the city lights outside did little to console him as he stared at his computer screen, lost in thought. He had always prided himself on his ability to look ahead, to take on risks and challenges that others weren't brave enough to confront. But this felt different. The stakes were higher than they had ever been before. He had always been a man of action, one who drove his companies forward with relentless ambition. But now, as the CEO of both SpaceX and Neuralink, he realized he was no longer just leading businesses. He was leading humanity itself into uncharted waters. And it terrified him. His mind wandered back to Ava, that brilliant, enigmatic 5-year-old whose IQ was beyond anything he could comprehend. The child had seen a future where human minds merged seamlessly with artificial intelligence, a future that promised to solve humanity's greatest challenges. But now, Elon wasn't so sure. Was this the right path, or was it simply a step into the unknown that no one could come back from? The question lingered in his mind, a quiet hum that refused to be ignored. The next day, he gathered the team at Neuralink to discuss their progress, but he found it difficult to focus. His usual confidence was replaced by doubt, and he was having trouble reconciling his ambition with the overwhelming responsibility he felt. Dr. Miriam Parks could sense his unease as he entered the conference room, but she didn't say anything at first. She simply watched him, waiting for him to speak. "We're moving faster than we should," Elon said suddenly, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of uncertainty. "I've been thinking a lot about this. Maybe too much. The technology is incredible, and we've made great strides. But there's a difference between advancing tech and understanding its consequences. I've been pushing us toward a future that we don't fully comprehend. I think it's time to slow down." The room fell silent. The team was used to Elon's aggressive pace and his ability to push boundaries, but this was different. This wasn't about engineering challenges or deadlines. This was something far more complex. It was about the very nature of existence and whether they were ready to unlock something that could change everything. Miriam spoke first, breaking the silence. "Are you saying we stop the project? Put everything on hold?" Elon looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each of his team members. He saw the fear in their faces, but also the excitement. There was a dangerous tension between the two. The promise of immortality, of transcending human limitations, was too alluring for many to resist. But Elon could feel it too, The pressure to be the one to bring about this monumental change. No, I'm not saying we stop, he replied slowly. But we need to reconsider our approach. We need to pause and think. Think about the future we're creating. And think about who gets to decide how this technology is used. Another scientist, Dr. Richard Lee, leaned forward, his face tense with anticipation. We've already started. We can't just pull back now. We have to finish what we started, Elon. People are depending on us. Elon felt the sharpness of Richard's words, but they didn't sway him. Instead, they intensified his internal conflict. There was so much at stake. So many people who believed in the project, believed in the future he had promised them. Could he really be the one to pull the plug, to halt progress when it was within their grasp? Maybe we can't just stop, Elon said, his voice quieter now, almost to himself. But we can't keep going without understanding the full consequences. We're not just changing the game. We're changing the rules of existence itself. Miriam gave him a long, searching look, then nodded. I understand what you're saying. We've been so focused on the technical side of things, but there's more to this. Maybe we do need to take a step back and reflect on the bigger picture. If we push ahead without fully considering what's at stake, we might regret it later. For a moment, Elon felt a flicker of relief. Maybe he wasn't alone in this after all. Maybe the team could understand the gravity of what they were about to do. That evening, after the meeting, Elon found himself walking the quiet halls of Neuralink's headquarters. His mind raced, but his steps were slow, as if his body were reluctant to move forward, as reluctant as his mind was. The cool, sterile walls of the building seemed to echo with uncertainty. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was standing at a precipice, a point of no return. If they went forward, they could change the world. But at what cost? As he walked, his thoughts wandered back to his childhood, to the early days when he had built his first computer, when his curiosity had driven him to explore the world around him, to find new ways to solve problems. Back then, there was no fear. There was just the thrill of discovery, the joy of creating something new. But now, as a father, as a leader, everything felt different. The stakes were personal. What would this new world mean for his children? What would it mean for humanity? He reached the rooftop, where the cool night air greeted him like an old friend. The city stretched out before him, a sea of lights that seemed to pulse with possibility and danger in equal measure. For a long time, he simply stood there, letting the breeze brush across his face. He thought of his father, who had always told him that progress wasn't about rushing ahead, but about making sure the foundation was solid before leaping. But Elon had always been one to leap first and deal with the consequences later. Was that still the right approach? The wind whispered through the trees below, a soft reminder that nature, too, had its limits. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't just a technological challenge. It wasn't about building the next great thing or reaching for the stars. It was about control, about who would hold the keys to this new world. The answer was terrifying. Whoever got there first. And in that moment, Elon realized that the choice he was making wasn't just about the technology. It was about something deeper, something more human. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon had spent the last few days in a kind of mental fog. The weight of his responsibility, of shaping not just the future of technology, but the future of human existence, was overwhelming. The ethical dilemma still gnawed at him. There was so much he didn't know, so much that was outside his control. But more than anything, he felt the pressure of being the one to lead humanity into uncharted territory. It wasn't until Ava called him that evening that things began to shift. The boy's voice came through the speaker, soft yet insistent. Mr. Musk, can I talk to you? Ava had become a regular part of Elon's life in recent weeks. Their conversations were always eye-opening, sometimes frustrating, but always enlightening. Ava had a rare gift, an almost supernatural ability to see beyond the present and predict the future in ways that made even Elon pause and question his own assumptions. There was something about Ava that felt otherworldly, as if his genius was merely a reflection of what the boy had already seen. Of course, Ava, Elon replied, his voice tired but eager. What's on your mind? There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, and then Ava's voice, calm but full of purpose, filled the air. You're wondering if you should keep going with Neuralink, aren't you? Elon blinked, taken aback. How do you know that? Ava's tone was almost playful, but there was a depth to his words that made Elon pause. I know you. You think too much. You get stuck on the what-ifs, the risks, the consequences. But what if I told you that thinking about all the bad things that might happen will never help you move forward? Elon sighed. He'd had conversations like this before, ones that challenged his own thinking, that made him question his own motivations. But this time, something was different. Ava's words were like a key turning in his mind, unlocking a new way of seeing things. You're asking me to stop thinking? Elon asked, half joking, but a part of him was truly intrigued. No, Ava replied, his voice steady and wise beyond his years. I'm asking you to think bigger. You're looking at this like it's just about the risks of AI. But what if it's not about the technology at all? Elon's curiosity piqued. He leaned forward in his chair, listening intently. What do you mean? What if it's about the opportunity to evolve, to move beyond the things that hold us back as humans? Ava's voice grew more animated. You think you're afraid of the unknown, but the truth is you're afraid of what people will say. You're afraid of the change you'll bring to the world. But if you don't make the change, someone else will. And maybe they won't do it the right way. Elon paused, letting Ava's words sink in. He hadn't considered it quite like that before. Of course, he knew there was a risk to the technology, that there would be people who didn't understand and would fight against it. But Ava was right. There was something bigger at stake. It wasn't just about the tech. It was about the very future of human potential. You're right. I've been focused on the wrong things, Elon said quietly, more to himself than to Ava. I've been so consumed with the fear of what could go wrong that I've overlooked the possibility of what could go right. But what if it does go wrong, Ava? What if we lose control? There was a long pause on the line. When Ava finally spoke, his voice was soft but resolute. You can't control everything, Mr. Musk. No one can. But you can be part of something bigger than yourself. You can help humanity evolve in a way that no one else can. You have the opportunity to give people the tools they need to think, feel, and live better. But you have to trust that you're doing the right thing. Elon's heart raced as he processed Ava's words. Trust, he muttered. Trust in the technology? Trust in the people? Trust in yourself, Ava said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. You're asking the right questions. That's the first step. But the second step is deciding that you're willing to move forward with the knowledge that no one can predict the future. You can't be afraid of that. For the first time in weeks, Elon felt a surge of clarity. He didn't have all the answers. No one did. But Ava was right. He couldn't stand still, paralyzed by fear of the unknown. If he believed in this technology, if he believed in what Neuralink could do for humanity, he had to push forward. Even if it meant taking risks, even if it meant stepping into a future that no one could predict. Thank you, Ava, Elon said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've given me something to think about. I think I know what I need to do. Ava's voice softened. You're welcome. But remember, Mr. Musk, don't be afraid to change the world. Just make sure you don't forget the people in it. After the conversation ended, Elon sat in silence for several minutes, reflecting on what Ava had said. The boy's wisdom was simple, yet profound. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt like he had found the clarity he had been searching for. He had always believed that technology could be a force for good, that it could change the world. But now, he realized that it wasn't just about the machines or the systems they were building. It was about the people who would use them. The future wasn't just about creating new forms of intelligence. It was about giving people the power to be more than they ever thought possible. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many unknowns, so many risks. But Elon was ready. He wasn't going to let fear hold him back anymore. As he looked out at the sprawling city below, he knew that he was on the cusp of something monumental. The world was about to change, and he was going to be at the forefront of that change. The weeks that followed his conversation with Ava were a blur. Elon threw himself back into the work, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. He pushed Neuralink's team harder, faster. The advancements were undeniable. They were closer than ever to realizing their dream, of bridging the human brain with artificial intelligence, of creating a new form of consciousness that could transcend the limits of biology. But as the excitement grew within the walls of Neuralink, so did the pressure from the outside world. The media caught wind of Elon's renewed commitment to Neuralink's mission. Headlines screamed about the potential for mind control and human enhancement. Some critics hailed him as a visionary. Others accused him of playing God, of meddling with forces that should remain beyond human reach. But it wasn't the media that truly worried Elon. It was the growing division among his own team. Not everyone shared his sense of urgency or his willingness to overlook the ethical dilemmas. Many of his most trusted colleagues, the ones who had been with him since the early days of the project, began to voice concerns. Dr. Miriam Parks, always one of Elon's most ardent supporters, had begun to hesitate. She was no longer sure if they were moving too fast, or if they were moving at all. "We're on the edge of something huge," she said during one of their meetings. "But I don't think we fully understand what we're doing. What's our responsibility if this goes wrong? What happens when we can no longer reverse the consequences?" Elon leaned forward in his chair, his mind racing. "Miriam, we've been talking about the risks for years. If we wait for the perfect moment, we'll never get there. We're doing this for humanity, don't you see? This is bigger than us. It's bigger than any of us can comprehend." But Miriam wasn't convinced. "And what if humanity isn't ready?" Her voice trembled. "What if this technology doesn't just enhance our lives, but changes us in ways we're not prepared for? What if it becomes a tool for oppression, for control?" Elon's pulse quickened. He had heard these questions before, but now, in the wake of the media storm, they felt louder, more pressing. He had no answers, just the drive to move forward. The backlash wasn't limited to his own team. Outside, the critics were louder than ever. Politicians, ethicists, and even religious leaders weighed in, warning of the dangers of transhumanism and the potential for abuse. The backlash was swift, and it was severe. Some even called for government intervention, demanding that Neuralink be shut down until further review. At a private press conference, Elon addressed the media with his usual calm demeanor, though the weight of the questions felt more oppressive than ever. "We're not creating something to control people," Elon said, his voice firm. "We're creating a tool to help them communicate faster, think more clearly, and live better. We're not playing God. We're giving people the ability to transcend their limitations." But the questions kept coming. What happens if this technology falls into the wrong hands? What if it's used for manipulation or surveillance? Elon paused, his eyes narrowing as he looked over the sea of reporters. "That's a risk with any technology," he said. "It's not about what the technology can do. It's about how we choose to use it. And if we're going to advance as a species, we have to take risks. We can't wait forever. We can't live in fear of what might go wrong." Despite his confident words, deep down, Elon knew that the battle he was fighting wasn't just against the critics. It was against the very nature of human resistance to change. People feared what they didn't understand, and they feared what they couldn't control. That night, as Elon walked back to his office at Neuralink, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. The doubts that had been simmering inside him returned with a vengeance. Was he really doing the right thing? Was this truly going to help humanity? Or was he blindly rushing forward into a future that could have disastrous consequences? He ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. His thoughts went back to Ava, to the boy who had given him the clarity to keep going, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. What would Ava think now? Just as he reached the door to his office, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unfamiliar number. "I think you're making a mistake. The future you're creating isn't the one you think it is." Elon frowned, puzzled. The message was brief, cryptic, and yet it felt oddly personal. He stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it, but no more texts followed. Was it a prank? Or was it someone trying to get under his skin? Shaking off the unsettling feeling, he opened his office door, prepared to bury himself in work. But as he sat down at his desk, the weight of the world pressed down even harder. He thought of his children, of the future he was building for them. What kind of world was he creating? A better one? Or one that would tear itself apart? The next morning, the pressure intensified. Miriam, once a close ally, had requested a private meeting. As she entered his office, she didn't greet him with her usual enthusiasm. Her face was solemn. "Elon," she said quietly, taking a seat across from him, "we need to talk." Elon sat up straighter, feeling the tension in the room. "What's going on?" Miriam hesitated. "I don't know if I can continue working on this project anymore. The risks are too great. I thought I was doing the right thing, but the more I think about it, the more I'm not sure." Elon's stomach dropped. "Are you telling me you want to leave?" Miriam nodded. "I don't know if I can be a part of this anymore. I can't ignore the moral questions, Elon. I can't ignore what this might mean for the world, for people who don't understand what we're doing, or who might be left behind." Elon felt the sting of her words. "You're talking about fear. Fear of the unknown." "It's not just fear," Miriam said, her voice breaking. "It's a responsibility, and I'm not sure I can carry it anymore." As she stood to leave, Elon felt the full weight of the moment. He had fought so hard to build something that could change the world, but now, the very people who had helped him get there were questioning everything. The future he had envisioned seemed to be slipping through his fingers, piece by piece. Elon barely slept that night. Miriam's departure weighed heavily on him. She had been one of his closest allies, a brilliant scientist and a trusted voice in the development of Neuralink. Her doubts, her decision to walk away from the project, hit him harder than he expected. He had always prided himself on being the visionary, the one who could push the boundaries of technology, but now, for the first time, he wondered if he had overlooked something crucial: the moral responsibility that came with his power. The next morning, he met with his team at Neuralink to discuss the next phase of their experiments. But the room felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air, a sense of unease. The enthusiasm that had once defined their meetings was gone. Instead, people spoke in hushed tones, casting wary glances toward Elon. His words seemed to carry less weight now, like the unquestioning trust they had once had in him was beginning to crack. "Elon, we need to address the public's concerns," said Dr. Samuel Turner, a senior engineer who had always been on the cutting edge of their work. "There's a growing backlash. People are starting to wonder if we're rushing this technology out too quickly. We're not addressing the ethical implications of what we're doing." Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had heard the concerns, of course. The media, the politicians, the public, they all seemed so quick to point out the dangers of what they were building. But Elon knew that fear of the unknown was a natural reaction. He had always believed in the power of progress, that humanity would eventually adapt to new technologies, just as it had throughout history. But Miriam's words echoed in his mind. "What if humanity isn't ready?" "I understand the concerns, Sam," Elon said, his voice tight. "But we've always known this would be controversial. It's a part of the process. We can't stop now because a few people are scared." "It's not just a few people," Sam replied. "It's growing. We're talking about people being worried about their very sense of self, what it means to be human. If we're merging our consciousness with AI, where do we draw the line?" Elon felt a knot form in his stomach. He had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. The questions weren't just about the technology, they were about the very essence of humanity. What did it mean to be human if our minds could be altered, enhanced, or even replaced by machines? As the meeting went on, Elon's frustration grew. He didn't have the answers they were looking for. All he knew was that they were on the brink of something world-changing, something that could propel humanity into the next stage of evolution. But at what cost? Later that day, Elon took a walk through the Neuralink facility, hoping that the quiet would help clear his mind. He needed to think. He had always believed that technological advancement was inevitable, that the future was something to be shaped by those brave enough to challenge the status quo. But now, with Miriam gone and the pressure mounting, he wasn't so sure. He found himself standing in front of the latest test subjects, volunteers who had agreed to undergo the Neuralink procedure. They were awake, their heads encased in the devices that would allow them to interface directly with computers, to experience the world in ways no human ever had before. The room was eerily quiet, save for the hum of the machines. Elon watched as the technicians worked, making adjustments to the devices, preparing for the next phase of experimentation. But instead of the excitement he once felt, he was filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. These people were putting their trust in him, in the technology he had championed, but was it the right choice? Elon, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Dr. Turner, the same man who had raised concerns earlier. Elon turned toward him, nodding. What's going on, Sam? We've got a problem, Sam said, his expression grim. One of the volunteers has had an adverse reaction to the procedure. Their brain activity is spiking, and we can't get it under control. We're losing them. Elon's heart raced. What do you mean? Are they going to be okay? Sam shook his head. I don't know. We're trying to stabilize them, but the system's not responding the way it's supposed to. The room seemed to close in on Elon as he rushed over to the volunteer's side. The young woman lay on the table, her body twitching slightly, her eyes wide open but unseeing. The technicians were frantically adjusting the controls, trying to regain control of the neural interface, but it was clear that something had gone horribly wrong. Elon's mind raced. This was the nightmare scenario, the one he had always feared, but hoped he could avoid. A malfunction like this could set the project back years. Worse, it could turn public opinion against them for good. If Neuralink could cause harm, if it could destabilize someone's mind, then everything they had worked for would be in jeopardy. What happened? Elon asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We don't know, Sam replied. We've run simulations, but there's always a margin of error. We never anticipated this level of instability. Elon stood there, frozen, as the woman's body jerked slightly and her eyes fluttered closed. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. This was no longer about innovation. It was about real human lives, real consequences. As the situation in the lab calmed down and the volunteer was stabilized, Elon retreated to his office. He needed to think, but his mind was racing in every direction. For the first time in his career, he questioned his judgment. Had he pushed too far? Had his ambition blinded him to the risks? He thought of Ava. He thought of the conversation they had, of the clarity that the young boy had given him. But now, as he sat alone in his office, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Ava had been too optimistic. Maybe the world wasn't ready for this. The storm was coming. The questions were only getting louder. The ethical dilemma had turned into a crisis, and Elon knew that, whether he was ready or not, he would have to face it head-on. The days after the incident were a blur of apologies, medical assessments, and media scrutiny. Neuralink's volunteer had been stabilized after a series of emergency interventions, but the damage had already been done. The story was everywhere. Headlines screamed of human experimentation gone wrong and Neuralink's first failure. Despite the team's best efforts to minimize the situation, the press had a field day. The public outcry was fierce, with politicians calling for government oversight and investigative committees forming to look into the safety of the procedure. The voices of dissent grew louder, echoing the same questions that had haunted Elon from the start. Was humanity ready for this kind of change? And should technology like this be allowed to proceed without more regulation? It was Sam again. The senior engineer had been a calm and reasonable presence in the aftermath of the crisis, but today his usual demeanor was cracked. They were sitting in Elon's office. The door was shut. The blinds were drawn, but even so, the weight of the world seemed to press in from every angle. Elon's phone buzzed incessantly, but he didn't pick it up. He didn't need to hear the angry calls. He already knew what they were saying. I know, Elon replied, rubbing his eyes, his voice hoarse. I know. Sam sat down across from him, his face creased with concern. The volunteer is stable, thank God, but that's the least of our problems. The media is calling this a dangerous experiment. Some are saying we should shut down the entire project. Hell, some of the board members are even suggesting we pause everything until we have a better understanding of the risks. Elon leaned back in his chair, hands folded in front of him. The weight of it all was suffocating. For years, he had fought to bring this vision to life, to create a new future for humanity. But now, with one failed procedure, the dream felt like it was slipping away. I've seen the headlines, Elon said, his tone tight with frustration. But I'm not stopping. Not after everything we've worked for. This is too important. Important? Sam's voice was incredulous. Yes, it's important, But we need to be responsible, Elon. We need to acknowledge the risks and find ways to mitigate them. We're not talking about cars or rockets here. We're talking about people's minds. If something goes wrong again, it won't just be a failure of technology. It will be a failure of ethics. Elon clenched his jaw. I didn't start Neuralink to be cautious. I started it to change the world. But you're right, Sam. We need to address the public's concerns. I can't afford to look like I'm rushing into this without considering the consequences. The next few days were filled with damage control. Elon held numerous meetings with the media, trying to explain the situation and calm the growing public hysteria. He reiterated that they were committed to making the technology safe, that the volunteers' incident was an isolated case that would lead to valuable insights for further improvement. But no matter what he said, it didn't seem to make a difference. The social media backlash was particularly brutal. Thousands of tweets labeled him as reckless, a mad scientist playing with people's lives. Some even compared him to the dystopian villains in movies like The Matrix or Terminator. The once loyal followers who had admired his boldness now questioned his sanity. What if we're wrong? Elon found himself thinking. In private, his team was fracturing. Sam was pushing for a thorough review of their protocols, demanding that they take a step back and rework their approach. But Elon couldn't afford to slow down. He felt the weight of history bearing down on him. If Neuralink didn't succeed, if the vision they had been working toward for years was derailed, what would it mean for humanity's future? Would anyone else step up to push the limits of what was possible? Elon's thoughts drifted to Ava again, the boy with the uncanny intelligence who had seen something in him that no one else had. You're not just making a new technology, Mr. Musk. You're making history. You're making something that could change everything. The memory of that conversation sparked a renewed sense of determination in him. Ava had been right. It wasn't just about technology. It was about something bigger, something world-altering. And despite the setback, he knew that Neuralink could still unlock doors no one had ever dared to open. That night, in the solitude of his home, Elon faced the hardest question yet. Should he continue pushing forward, or should he listen to the growing voices of doubt and take a step back? As he sat alone in the dark, the weight of the world pressing down on him, he realized that he couldn't quit. Not yet. Neuralink wasn't just his dream anymore. It was a cause that had transcended him. It was about what they could achieve, not just for themselves, but for the future of humanity. But there was no denying the price he was paying. The public, the media, and even some of his closest colleagues were questioning his every move. The dream of a connected, smarter world was slipping away, and Elon couldn't shake the fear that it might all come crashing down. The following day, a new voice of dissent emerged. One of the most prominent neuroscientists in the world, Dr. Julian Harris, published an op-ed in the New York Times titled "The Dangers of Merging Minds with Machines," a wake-up call for Elon Musk. The article tore into Neuralink's ambitions, warning of the potential for irreversible damage to human identity and the ethical nightmare of allowing machines to control thought. Harris argued that Neuralink was not only unprepared to address the ethical implications, but also dangerously naive in its rush to push the boundaries of science. Elon's phone rang incessantly. The board members were calling again. Investors were nervous. And the media, of course, was only too happy to stoke the fire. "This is the beginning of the end," Sam muttered when Elon finally spoke with him about the article. "The public won't stand for it. They won't trust us anymore." Elon's mind was reeling. The future he had so carefully crafted for Neuralink was now in jeopardy. His vision was being questioned by the very people he had hoped to inspire. And deep down, he couldn't help but wonder if he had pushed too far, too fast. That evening, after another exhausting day of meetings and public statements, Elon found himself in a quiet moment of reflection. He stared out of the window at the sprawling city below, lost in thought. He thought of all the times he had risked everything: SpaceX, Tesla, Solar City. Each time, he had faced near collapse. But somehow, he had managed to keep going. This was no different. But was it? Could he afford to risk everything this time? Was Neuralink worth the cost? In the end, the only answer that mattered was the one he had always known. Elon Musk was a man driven by a singular vision, a vision of a future where humanity could rise above its limitations. And he wasn't about to let a few setbacks stop him from achieving that. With renewed determination, he stood up from his desk and sent a message to his team. We move forward. We fix what's broken and we keep going. We're not backing down. The future is still out there, and we're going to find it. The following weeks were a blur of long hours, press conferences, and internal debates. Every decision Elon made seemed to carry a heavier weight. Neuralink was on the edge. Public confidence was at an all-time low. Investors were getting antsy, and even the most loyal members of his team were beginning to question the long-term viability of the project. Despite the mounting pressure, Elon refused to step back. He had come too far. He had risked too much. Neuralink was his lifeline to a future where humanity wasn't shackled by its biological limitations. And he wasn't going to let a few setbacks derail the vision he had spent his entire career building. We need a breakthrough, Elon said one afternoon during an emergency meeting with his senior team. His voice was hard, tinged with an intensity that had begun to consume him. We can't afford to keep putting out fires. We need to show the world that Neuralink is safe, that it's revolutionary, that it's the future. Sam Turner, who had been one of Elon's most trusted engineers, looked across the table at him. The once optimistic team had been growing more and more divided. Sam's face was drawn, the lines of stress deepening. He spoke cautiously. Elon, I agree that we need progress. But at what cost? If we don't address the concerns, if we don't slow down and reevaluate some of the protocols, we could lose everything. Public trust, investor confidence, our entire reputation. Elon shook his head. He had heard it all before. We're not backing down, Sam. If we don't push forward now, we'll never get this right. We can't let fear stop us from achieving greatness. Elon's words hung in the air, thick with the tension of conflicting ideals. He had always believed that humanity's greatest advancements came from those willing to go beyond the conventional boundaries. But now, it felt as though the walls were closing in on him, and no matter how hard he pushed, he couldn't seem to break through. Later that day, Elon met with the investors, those who had once been on board with Neuralink's bold vision but were now pulling back. The room was filled with familiar faces, some of whom had stood beside him when SpaceX and Tesla were on the verge of collapse. They knew the risks. But now, as the reality of Neuralink's failure began to settle in, their patience was running thin. Elon, one investor, a seasoned venture capitalist named Thomas Green, spoke up, his voice sharp. I've been in this business for decades. I've seen visionary companies rise and fall. But this is a different animal. We've got serious concerns about the ethics of your project. People are scared. If this isn't handled carefully, you risk not just the future of Neuralink, but your entire reputation. Elon's eyes narrowed. He had expected these questions, but hearing them so bluntly stung. You think I don't understand the risks? Elon replied, his voice cold. I built Tesla from the ground up. I've sent rockets to Mars. I know how to handle adversity. Neuralink is the next step in human evolution. We can't afford to slow down. Green leaned forward, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. I respect your drive, Elon, but at the rate you're going, this could all blow up in your face. You need to make a decision. Either you address the ethical concerns and pull back to make sure everything is safe, or you keep pushing forward without considering the fallout. But if you choose the latter, you might lose more than you think. The weight of Green's words lingered long after the meeting ended. Elon stared out his office window, his mind a chaotic whirlwind. He had always been the risk-taker, the one who believed in the impossible. But was Neuralink really about the future of humanity, or was he just too stubborn to see the dangers? The question gnawed at him. That night, as Elon sat at his desk in his private study, he found himself returning to one thought again and again. What if I'm wrong? The images of the volunteer, twitching on the table during the failed procedure, haunted him. The ethical questions that Miriam had raised now felt louder than ever. Was he truly willing to sacrifice human lives for the sake of progress? Was Neuralink's promise of enhancing the human mind worth the risk of losing what it meant to be human in the first place? As the days passed, Elon began to take more drastic actions. He knew that Neuralink couldn't move forward without restoring public confidence. But how could he do that after everything that had happened? He called for an unprecedented move, an open demonstration. We need to show the world that Neuralink works, that it's safe, he said during a meeting with his team. We need to put ourselves out there, be transparent. We'll invite the press, independent scientists, and even our harshest critics to witness the next procedure. We'll answer their questions. We'll show them the truth. Sam's face was a mix of disbelief and concern. You want to invite the press? After everything that's happened? Do you think they'll just forget about the controversy and take your word for it? Yes, Elon said firmly. If we show them the potential, if we prove that Neuralink can be done safely, we'll win them back. This isn't just about fixing the technology, it's about fixing our image. We need to be transparent. The team was divided, but the decision was made. Neuralink would hold a public demonstration. The date was set. The day of the demonstration arrived, and the pressure was palpable. Elon stood backstage, watching the volunteers prepare for the procedure. There were security guards, journalists, scientists, and critics all gathered in the audience. The room buzzed with skepticism, the air thick with anticipation. Elon's nerves were palpable, his usual confidence replaced by a quiet anxiety. He knew this moment would either make or break everything. One wrong move, one misstep, and Neuralink would be finished. But if he could pull it off, it would prove to the world that Neuralink was the future of human evolution. As the procedure began, Elon stood at the front of the room, speaking directly to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness is not just a breakthrough in technology. It's a breakthrough in humanity's potential. This is Neuralink, the future of brain-machine interfaces. The room fell silent as the volunteers, now connected to the Neuralink system, began their live demonstration. Cameras clicked, and the press took note. But Elon knew the real test was in the reactions, both from the volunteers and the world watching. Minutes passed, and everything seemed to go according to plan. The volunteers were stable, their neural connections working as intended. But as the data began to come through, a small glitch in the system caused the readings to spike unexpectedly. The crowd gasped. Elon's heart stopped. Was this it? Had the demonstration just gone horribly wrong? But then the spike stabilized, and the volunteers seemed to regain their composure. The room let out a collective sigh of relief. The demonstration continued without further incident. The presentation was over, but the tension remained. As the cameras were packed up and the audience filed out, Elon stood alone for a moment. He realized something critical. The demonstration had been a success, but the real battle was still ahead. This wasn't just about the technology working. It was about proving to the world that Neuralink was safe and ethical, that humanity could trust him. The days following the demonstration were a whirlwind of mixed reactions. Neuralink had survived its biggest public test, but whether it was truly a victory remained in question. The media coverage was a mix of cautious optimism and continued skepticism. Some hailed it as a groundbreaking moment in science, while others questioned the ethics, the safety, and the viability of what Elon Musk had been trying to achieve. Elon found himself in back-to-back meetings, fielding questions from investors, reporters, and even ethicists who were raising concerns about the implications of mind-machine interfaces. The intense scrutiny had intensified, and with it, the pressure. His mind raced as he tried to balance his need for progress with the harsh realities of what Neuralink could potentially unleash. One evening, after a particularly grueling round of interviews, Elon sat alone in his office. His head rested in his hands as he stared blankly at the wall. The weight of the world felt as though it was pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had always thrived under pressure, but this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the cost of failure was no longer just personal, it was global. Elon, are you okay? A voice broke through the fog of his thoughts. He looked up to see Ava standing in the doorway. She looked concerned, her face soft with worry. Ava had been there through all of his greatest triumphs, but she had also seen him in his most vulnerable moments. Lately, though, he had been more distant than ever. I don't know, he replied, his voice rough. All of this, it's too much. I thought I was prepared for this level of scrutiny, but I don't think I was. Ava stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She sat across from him, her eyes not leaving his face. You've been pushing yourself too hard. You've been pushing everyone too hard. Maybe it's time to take a step back, rethink some of your strategies. Elon shook his head. I can't. We're so close. I can feel it. Ava, Neuralink is going to change everything. But I can't do it alone. I need the team. I need investors. I need the world to believe in this vision. And right now, everything feels like it's slipping through my fingers. Ava's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his. You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to fix everything overnight. I know you want to change the world, but sometimes, changing the world means taking care of yourself first. Elon looked at her, her words cutting through his anxiety like a knife. He had been so consumed by the mission that he had neglected the people around him, especially Ava. He hadn't realized how much he had been pushing her away, too. She had always been his anchor, his constant reminder that there was more to life than just success. I don't know how to stop Ava, he said quietly, his voice filled with frustration and exhaustion. I feel like if I stop, everything will collapse. Neuralink, Tesla, SpaceX, everything I've worked for. It all feels like it's teetering on the edge. She squeezed his hand gently. Then let me help you. Let's face this together. Whatever happens, you're not alone in this. In the days that followed, Elon took a hard look at everything. His work, his personal life, and his relationship with Ava. The pressure had been building for so long that it had started to crack the foundation of everything he had built. He realized that maybe the answer wasn't just pushing harder. Maybe it was about stepping back, finding balance, and reevaluating how to move forward. But the path ahead wasn't clear. The internal tension at Neuralink was palpable, and outside forces were growing louder. Critics were more vocal, public trust was fragile, and the ethical debates were intensifying. The world seemed to be divided into two camps: those who believed in the potential of Neuralink to revolutionize humanity, and those who feared the consequences of playing with the very fabric of what made humans human. The breakthrough Elon had hoped for, one that would silence the critics and cement Neuralink's place in history, had not yet come. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Elon and Ava walked outside to the balcony of his home. The city sprawled below them, the lights twinkling like distant stars. Elon's gaze was fixed on the horizon, but his thoughts were far away. You've been quiet, Ava said, her voice soft. What's on your mind? Elon sighed deeply. I keep thinking about the people. The ones who are against Neuralink. The ones who question everything we're doing. They're scared. I get it. But we can't just let fear dictate the future. And I can't keep pushing without knowing where we're headed. Ava leaned against the railing, her arms crossed. You're not just changing the future of technology, Elon. You're changing the future of humanity. That's going to come with resistance. You're not going to win everyone over. But you can't lose yourself in the process. You need to decide what kind of future you want and what you're willing to sacrifice to get there. Her words hung in the air, the quiet stillness of the evening amplifying their weight. Elon had always known that his ambitions would come with consequences. But now, more than ever, he understood that the cost wasn't just measured in technology. It was measured in relationships, trust, and his own well-being. The next day, Elon made a decision. He called a meeting with the Neuralink team, investors, and key partners. He was ready to take the next step, but it wouldn't be the reckless push he had envisioned in the past. This time, he would be more deliberate, more thoughtful. We're going to slow things down, he said firmly, his voice steady. We're going to reassess. We need to focus on making this safe, making it ethical, and making it something the world can trust. We've already made incredible progress, but now it's time to address the concerns head-on. The room fell silent. It wasn't the announcement anyone had expected, but it was exactly what they needed. For the first time in weeks, Elon felt a sense of clarity. He didn't have to prove anything to the world right now. What mattered was building Neuralink the right way, and that meant taking the time to understand and address the issues, no matter how difficult they were. As Elon walked back to his office after the meeting, he saw Ava waiting for him in the hallway. Her smile was small but genuine. You did the right thing, she said softly. You're not just a leader. You're a human being. And that's what people will remember. Elon paused, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Maybe it wasn't about changing the world in a rush. Maybe it was about changing it thoughtfully. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of the real breakthrough. The shift in approach was clear, and the world was watching. Neuralink's new direction was causing waves in the tech and scientific communities, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. The moment Elon announced that the company would slow its pace, reevaluate its safety protocols, and prioritize ethical concerns, the backlash from some investors was swift. The next few weeks were filled with intense discussions, roundtables with ethicists, closed-door meetings with investors, and public relations blitzes to salvage the company's image. Elon didn't mind the scrutiny. He welcomed it. In fact, he had made peace with the idea that Neuralink would always be controversial. But there was something different this time. The questions weren't just about the technology anymore. They were about the potential consequences for society as a whole. He sat at the head of a long conference table, looking around at the faces of his team. Ava sat next to him, her expression calm but watchful. She could sense the tension that had been building ever since their decision to pause and reassess. There were still those who pushed for faster results, who believed that every delay meant a missed opportunity, not just for profit, but for the greater good. "We're talking about changing the human experience itself," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that was hard to ignore. "And that means we have to approach it differently. We can't just charge ahead blindly because it's exciting or because we think we can. This isn't just about technology. It's about the future of humanity." Ava nodded, her fingers tapping gently on the table. "Elon's right. We've come this far, but we need to make sure we're not jumping into a future without fully understanding the consequences. People are scared because they don't understand it. We need to build that trust." One of the senior investors, a woman named Sylvia Torres, spoke up. "With all due respect, Elon, I understand your concerns, but slowing down could mean losing our competitive edge. We have competitors in the field, and if we fall behind now, we risk losing everything." Elon turned to face Sylvia, his eyes hardening for a moment. "I don't care about competition, Sylvia. I care about doing this the right way. If that means slowing down, then so be it. But this isn't just about profit margins. This is about what we leave behind. This is about how we live in a world where technology and humanity are more connected than ever before." Sylvia hesitated, clearly taken aback by his forceful tone. But she knew better than to argue with Elon when he was like this. She'd seen it in the early days of Tesla, SpaceX, and even Neuralink. Once his mind was made up, there was no turning back. Outside the boardroom, the world continued to evolve. News outlets covered every aspect of Neuralink's shift in strategy, from interviews with prominent neuroscientists to debates on national TV about whether or not humanity was ready for a brain-machine interface. Public perception was split. Some viewed Elon as a visionary, someone who was willing to take the ethical high ground for the sake of the future. Others saw him as a man who had created a Frankenstein-like monster and was now scrambling to put the pieces back together. One evening, as Elon and Ava were driving back to his house, the weight of the situation began to settle in. The air in the car felt thick with unspoken thoughts. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Ava asked quietly, her voice soft as she looked out the window. The city lights reflected in her eyes, but there was something heavier in her gaze. Elon's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but I can't just ignore the concerns. There are so many ethical questions that we haven't even begun to address. Is it ethical to give people the power to control machines with their minds? What if that power is misused? What if it's weaponized?" Ava turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "You've always known this wasn't going to be easy, Elon. But you also know that the world isn't going to wait. You can't fix everything in one go. But you can make sure that whatever happens next, we're doing it with our eyes wide open." He sighed, leaning back in his seat. "I don't think I'm afraid of failure anymore. But I'm afraid of what happens if we don't get this right." Ava placed a hand on his arm, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You won't know until you try. But you can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders alone. And that's why I'm here. We're in this together." As the conversation hung in the air, a new challenge began to emerge. News broke the next day that a controversial hacker group had gained access to some of Neuralink's most confidential data. While nothing catastrophic had been leaked, the breach raised serious questions about the security of their systems and the potential for exploitation. The hacker group, calling themselves the Free Minds, had targeted Neuralink specifically, citing concerns over the abuse of power and the potential for mind control. The irony was not lost on Elon. They were accusing him of something that had always been at the forefront of his concerns: the ethical use of Neuralink's technology. In the days following the breach, Neuralink's security team worked around the clock to contain the damage, but the incident only deepened the public's fear. "This is exactly what I've been talking about," Elon said, pacing around his office as he spoke with Ava. "People are scared. They're worried that we'll make them into something they're not. And the worst part? Maybe they're right. I can't just ignore that." Ava watched him, her face calm but her eyes full of concern. "The thing is, you can't control how people will react. You can't fix their fears. But you can fix your approach. You can lead by example and show the world that you're doing this for the right reasons. And that might be enough to change the narrative." Elon nodded slowly. He knew Ava was right. The journey wasn't just about convincing people of the power of Neuralink. It was about demonstrating the responsibility that came with that power. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of it. As the days passed, Elon began to adjust his strategy. He knew that Neuralink couldn't just be about scientific achievement anymore. It needed to be about trust. Public relations were crucial, but more than that, the company needed to forge deeper relationships with regulators, ethicists, and, most importantly, the people who would one day use the technology. He took to social media to address the hacker group's concerns, admitting the breach and acknowledging the risks. He was direct, honest, and open about the hurdles they still faced. "We are not here to control people's minds," he wrote in a tweet. "We are here to unlock the full potential of the human brain. But we understand that with great power comes great responsibility. We are committed to getting it right, not just for the future, but for humanity." The response was mixed. Some applauded his transparency, while others remained wary. But for Elon, the message was clear. This was a journey that required not just technological innovation, but moral courage. The next day, as the sun rose over the horizon, Elon and Ava stood together on his balcony, overlooking the city below. The air was cool, and the world seemed to be holding its breath. "What now?" Ava asked, her voice quiet but steady. Elon gazed out at the skyline, the future uncertain but filled with possibility. "Now," he said, his voice determined, "we move forward, but we do it carefully. We do it with integrity." The public eye never blinked. If anything, it grew more intense. Ever since Elon had openly addressed the breach and reassured the public of Neuralink's commitment to ethical practices, there had been a flood of opinions. The media wasn't just interested in the science anymore. They were fascinated by the ethical dilemma Neuralink presented. Would the brain-machine interface be humanity's salvation, or would it be the spark for a new form of oppression? The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Elon found himself at the center of an ethical debate unlike any other he had faced before. Neurotechnology was a gray area. There was no roadmap for how to proceed. Scientists, tech experts, ethicists, and even philosophers were all weighing in, with some calling Neuralink a necessary leap into the future and others labeling it a dangerous step toward the uncharted territories of mind control. One afternoon, a particularly high-stakes event loomed. A live-stream debate between Elon and Dr. Beatrice Caldwell, a prominent neuroscientist who had long voiced her concerns about the unchecked growth of brain-computer interfaces. She was articulate, sharp, and not afraid to push back against Elon's idealism. Elon had agreed to the debate, knowing that public perception was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. The world needed to see that he wasn't just pushing for progress at any cost. He was listening. He was learning. Sitting backstage, the tension in the air was thick. Ava stood next to him, offering a quiet word of encouragement. "You've got this. You're not just here to defend the technology. You're here to show people the bigger picture. Just remember, it's about responsibility, not about being right." Elon glanced at her, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. It's just, every time I think we're moving in the right direction, something else comes up. And now, I have to convince everyone that we're not just about creating a machine to read thoughts. This is about helping people. I can't let them lose sight of that." "And you won't," Ava said with a smile, squeezing his hand. "You've always had a vision. This is just one more chapter in the story. You've come this far, and you've got the heart to get us through." The lights dimmed, and the camera flashed on. The debate began. Dr. Caldwell wasted no time. Mr. Musk, Neuralink's technology poses unprecedented risks. You're asking us to trust that your company, with its track record of pushing the boundaries of science and technology, will not take advantage of the access it has to our most intimate faculties, our thoughts, our memories, our very sense of self. The audience watched, rapt with attention. Elon leaned forward, ready to respond. I understand your concerns, Dr. Caldwell, but what I want people to understand is this. We're not just building a device to interface with the brain. We're developing a solution to restore autonomy to people suffering from paralysis, memory loss, and neurodegenerative diseases. This is not about control. It's about empowerment. Dr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow. Empowerment, you say? But how do we know that the lines won't blur? How do we know this won't be used for surveillance, for manipulation, for power? Once the technology is out there, it's no longer in your hands. And that's the dangerous part. Elon's gaze didn't waver. He knew this was the crux of the argument, the question of control. That's the challenge. But that's also the opportunity. It's not about us deciding how people use the technology. It's about creating safeguards, creating laws and frameworks that prevent misuse. This technology has the potential to do incredible things, but it has to be treated with the utmost responsibility. We can't ignore the risks, but we also can't ignore the benefits. The audience remained silent, clearly divided. Dr. Caldwell's next words were carefully chosen, as if calculating her every move. And what if the safeguards fail? What if you're not around to put the brakes on it when it's too late? What if you've created something that can be used to shape society in ways you never intended? That's the fear I have, Mr. Musk. That's the fear everyone should have. The tension in the air was palpable. Elon took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. That's a fair point, Dr. Caldwell. And that's why we are working with policymakers, ethicists, and the public to ensure that Neuralink is held to the highest standards of safety and ethics. We are not perfect, but we are committed. If we don't get it right, then we all lose. But if we succeed, we could change the lives of millions of people for the better. As the debate came to a close, it was clear that neither side had won over the other. The world remained split, and Neuralink's future was still uncertain. Elon and Ava walked off the stage, both exhausted but resolute. You did well, Ava said, offering a tired but genuine smile. You made your case, and that's what matters. Now we just have to wait and see how people respond. Elon nodded, his mind already racing. I'm not sure I convinced anyone. There's still so much fear out there, Ava. And that fear, it's real. People don't understand what this could do, and it's terrifying. That's the thing about fear, Ava replied, her voice steady. It's often based on the unknown. But once people see the good, once they see how it can help, then that fear will fade. It's just a matter of time. We just have to stay the course. Over the next few days, Neuralink's social media channels were flooded with reactions to the debate. While some saw Elon's words as convincing, others remained unconvinced. Articles began popping up in the mainstream media, each one asking the same questions. Is Elon Musk really the right person to oversee this kind of technology? What happens when the power of the mind becomes a commodity? The pressure on Neuralink mounted, and Elon felt it like a weight on his chest. The company had become more than just a business. It had become a symbol, a lightning rod for all the fears and hopes surrounding the future of humanity. The stakes had never been higher. One night, as Elon sat in his office, reviewing the flood of messages and media reports, Ava appeared at the door, her expression serious. Elon, we need to talk, she said softly. He looked up from the screen, meeting her gaze. What's wrong? It's not just the media we have to worry about anymore, Ava said, her voice low. There are rumors circulating that some of your biggest investors are getting cold feet. They're worried about the backlash. And worse, there are whispers that they're looking for a way to pull out. Elon's stomach dropped. Are you serious? After everything we've been through? Ava nodded grimly. They're scared. And when people are scared, they start looking for exits. We need to figure out a way to show them that Neuralink is still worth the investment, that we're still committed to getting it right. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. I won't let it fail. I refuse to let it fail. The weeks after the debate felt like an eternity. Despite the calm exterior Elon maintained, there were days when he couldn't shake the sense that everything was slipping out of his control. The media frenzy hadn't died down. Instead, it had intensified. And now, the very thing he had worked so hard to build was under attack, not just from external forces, but from within his own ranks. Investor concerns had escalated. Rumors of potential pullouts were growing louder by the day. They were worried, not just about the ethics of Neuralink, but about its potential to cause irreversible societal damage. They feared that the company was in over its head, that they had gotten too close to the unknown, and that no amount of assurances could promise them safety. The walls were closing in, and Elon could feel the weight on his chest, the feeling of being cornered. It was late one night when Ava found Elon sitting in the conference room, his face illuminated only by the dim light of his laptop screen. Papers were scattered around him, and he was lost in the numbers, trying to calculate how long they could survive without the support of their investors. "You don't have to do this alone," Ava said, breaking the silence. She had been observing him for hours, trying to give him space, but now the air between them felt thick with tension. "You can't carry this weight by yourself, Elon. I know you don't want to admit it, but there's only so much one person can handle." Elon didn't look up. His fingers hovered over the keys, his mind racing. "I built this. This is mine. Every decision I made led us here, and now, it's my responsibility to make sure it works. I can't just walk away, Ava. I can't just give up." Ava sighed softly, walking over to the table and sitting across from him. "Nobody's asking you to give up, but you can't do it all on your own. You need people who believe in the vision, people who can help you steer this thing in the right direction." Elon's eyes finally met hers. There was a flicker of exhaustion in them, a weariness that seemed to run deeper than the stress of the project. "The people who believed in the vision, my investors, my team, they're all pulling away. It's like they're seeing this as a failure before it even had a chance to succeed. And he paused, a deep breath escaping his lungs. "I don't know if I can keep going like this. Every day, I wake up to a new problem, a new roadblock. How can I fix this?" Ava reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "You're not the only one who believes in this. I do too, and you don't have to do it alone. There are still people in this company who believe in you, in us. We just need to bring them together." For the first time in weeks, a small flicker of hope sparked inside Elon. He hadn't realized how much he had isolated himself, how much he had internalized the weight of it all. Maybe Ava was right. Maybe he didn't have to do it all himself. But the next few days proved just how hard it would be to rebuild that sense of unity. Meetings were filled with more tension than ever. Several high-ranking members of Neuralink were openly questioning the company's long-term viability. One of the senior investors even suggested that they pause all development until the public perception of the technology shifted, to avoid any further backlash. One morning, after a particularly heated meeting, Ava found Elon on the roof of the building, staring out at the city below. His hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his shoulders tense. "You're running yourself into the ground," she said softly, walking up to him. "You need to rest." Elon didn't reply right away, but after a moment, he spoke in a quiet voice. "I don't know if I can keep going, Ava. I don't know if I can fix this." Ava stood beside him, her voice firm but filled with compassion. "That's the thing about leadership, Elon. It's not about having all the answers. It's about knowing when to ask for help. You can't do it alone. Not now, not ever." For a moment, there was silence. The city was quiet in the early morning, the only sound the soft hum of the world waking up. Elon closed his eyes, letting the cool air fill his lungs. "I don't know what to do anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't lose everything I've worked for. Not after everything we've been through." Ava looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. "You won't lose it. Not if you trust in the people who've been with you from the beginning. You just need to take a step back, clear your mind, and think about the bigger picture. What's your end goal here, Elon?" Elon exhaled slowly, his mind trying to make sense of the whirlwind. "To change the world. To make it better. But it feels like we're just making things worse, and I don't know how to fix that." Ava's voice softened. It's not all bad. Not everything is broken. You've come so far already. You've changed the way people think about technology. You've created something that has the power to transform lives. It's just going to take time for people to see that. Elon turned to face her, his expression a mix of frustration and resolve. I don't have time, Ava. Every day we're in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. Every day I feel like we're moving closer to a disaster. She placed a hand on his arm, offering him a reassuring smile. We'll get through this. You don't need to be the only one fighting. Let me help you. Let's fix this together. For the first time in weeks, Elon felt the pressure begin to lift. It wasn't gone, but it felt manageable. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with Ava by his side, and with the team they had carefully built around them, maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide. The days that followed were a mix of intense work, quiet reflection, and difficult decisions. Elon began to reach out to key figures within Neuralink, asking for their input, sharing his concerns, and making it clear that the company's future depended on collaboration, not isolation. Slowly, the fractures began to heal. Ava continued to be his anchor, offering him moments of clarity when the stress felt overwhelming. And though they didn't have all the answers, they both knew one thing for sure. This was not the end. It was just another challenge, another test of their resilience. The world was still buzzing with news about Neuralink, but Elon and Ava had decided that it was time to act, not react. The internal strife at the company wasn't over, but they had taken the first step toward mending the broken pieces. They were no longer running from the tension. They were embracing it, using it as fuel for the next phase of the journey. Elon had spent the last few days working side by side with his closest team members, outlining a new vision for Neuralink that focused on the societal benefits, not just the technology. He made calls, held meetings, and engaged in difficult conversations with investors. But it wasn't just about persuading them to stay. It was about getting them to believe again. The fight wasn't just against skepticism. It was against the collective sense of doubt that had permeated the air. Meanwhile, Ava had been working behind the scenes, focusing on a different aspect of the battle: public perception. They needed to show the world that Neuralink wasn't a dystopian experiment, but a tool for human advancement. They needed a plan, a story that would captivate the masses and convince them that Neuralink had a future far beyond its controversial beginnings. It was in the middle of a strategy meeting when Elon's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and the world seemed to freeze. It was one of his key investors, Jared Wilkinson, the man who held the fate of Neuralink in his hands. I'll take this, Elon said, excusing himself from the table. He stepped out of the conference room, his heart pounding. Ava watched him go, knowing this call would decide. The conversation was short, but the words hit hard. Elon, we need to talk. Jared's voice came through, cold and firm. I've been thinking long and hard about what's happening with Neuralink, and I'm not sure I can support this anymore. The risks are too high. The public perception is toxic. I can't keep pouring money into a project that's becoming a liability. Elon's throat tightened. He had heard this before, but hearing it now, when everything was hanging by a thread, felt different. I understand your concerns, Jared, but I need you to understand something. Neuralink is not just about profits, it's about progress. We're not trying to just build another product. We're building the future. This technology will change the world. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I don't doubt your vision, Elon, but there's a difference between vision and execution. You need more than just innovation. You need trust. And right now, that trust is in short supply. Elon clenched his jaw. He knew Jared was right. Trust was the most valuable currency in this business, and they had lost a lot of it. The call ended without resolution, but Elon wasn't ready to give up yet. As he walked back into the meeting room, his mind was racing. He couldn't afford to lose another investor, not now. But this wasn't just about one call or one person. It was about the future of the company. Ava stood up as he re-entered, her eyes sharp with concern. What happened? Elon didn't speak immediately. His mind was elsewhere. Finally, he said, we need a breakthrough. Something to change the narrative. Ava's gaze softened. She could see the weight on his shoulders. What do you have in mind? For the next few days, Elon and Ava worked tirelessly on a new campaign. It was a gamble, a last-ditch effort to shift public perception and re-establish Neuralink's place in the future of technology. They decided to go public with a human interest story. They would focus on the real-world impact of Neuralink's technology, showcasing how it had already helped those who had suffered from debilitating conditions. They would feature individuals who had benefited from the technology, showing the world that it wasn't just about implants and brain surgeries, it was about improving lives. The day of the press event arrived. Elon stood backstage, his heart racing. He wasn't nervous about speaking. He had done that countless times. But today, it was different. This wasn't just another presentation. This was the last chance to prove that Neuralink had a future. "You're ready," Ava said softly, her voice calm but confident. She had been with him through the highs and lows of this journey, and now, it was her words that gave him the strength to move forward. "We've put everything on the line, but it's the right thing to do." Elon nodded, but the uncertainty was still there. The room outside was filled with journalists, investors, and medical professionals, all eager to see the company's next step. But it wasn't just about impressing them. It was about reaching the people who had never heard of Neuralink, who didn't understand the potential it held. The audience they needed to win over was far larger than any boardroom or conference hall. The moment arrived. Elon stepped onto the stage, the bright lights almost blinding him as he faced the audience. His speech was rehearsed, but it wasn't just words. It was an emotional appeal to everything that had driven him to create Neuralink in the first place. He spoke about the dreams, the challenges, the sacrifices. But most of all, he spoke about hope, the hope that technology could be a force for good. "We are standing on the edge of something monumental," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "Neuralink is not just about creating a new product. It's about creating a new future, a future where we can bridge the gap between humanity and technology. A future where no one has to suffer because of their limitations, where the potential of the human mind is no longer confined by biology. This is the future we are building, and it is a future worth fighting for." As the speech concluded, the crowd sat in stunned silence. Elon had said everything that needed to be said, but would it be enough? The press event continued, with interviews and panel discussions, and little by little, the tide began to turn. People started to see the vision, not just the technology, but the potential for real, tangible change. The human stories, the faces of the people whose lives had been changed by Neuralink, struck a chord that no amount of data or statistics ever could. The following weeks were a blur of media coverage, new investor meetings, and public responses. Slowly, Neuralink began to regain its footing. Jared Wilkinson called back, offering a glimmer of hope, though his doubts still lingered. But for Elon, that was enough. It was a sign that they were moving in the right direction. As they sat together in the quiet aftermath, Ava looked at Elon, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "You did it," she said. "We did it." Elon's lips twitched into a small smile. "No, we haven't won yet, but we've got a chance." And for the first time in a long time, Elon felt the weight of the future lift just a little bit. There was still much to be done, still many battles to fight. But now, for the first time, he had hope. The weight of the past months seemed to dissolve as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds. Elon stood on the balcony of his office, overlooking the city he had spent so many years trying to reshape. There was still much work to do, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Neuralink had survived, and perhaps more importantly, it had evolved. The investor calls had quieted down, the media frenzy had shifted to a more balanced narrative, and most importantly, the company's technology was beginning to find its true calling. The breakthroughs they had promised were no longer just theoretical. They were becoming real, and the lives of those who had been suffering from conditions like paralysis, severe memory loss, and neurological disorders were changing. The mission he'd set out on so long ago was slowly becoming a reality. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of progress. Neuralink's new focus on human-centered applications had gained traction both within the tech community and in the general public. After the press event, the public response had been overwhelming. People were now beginning to understand the transformative potential of the company's work. Ava had become instrumental in pushing the company's message forward. Together, they had not only saved Neuralink, but had redefined its narrative. Ava had crafted a marketing campaign that placed a face to the technology, real people whose lives had been changed by the advancements. The turning point came when a prominent doctor in the neurology field, Dr. Clara Grayson, spoke publicly about the first successful treatments of brain injuries using Neuralink's interface. Her testimony gave the company the credibility it had been missing. Investors started coming back, not just in terms of money, but in the form of a stronger sense of partnership. There was still a long road ahead, but the storm had passed. Elon and Ava were sitting across from each other in a sleek conference room, discussing the next steps for the company. The mood was different now. They no longer felt like they were fighting a losing battle. They were charting the future. "We're back on track," Elon said, his voice filled with a quiet confidence. "I think we've turned the corner." Ava smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was relieved. Rather, it was the smile of someone who knew this was just the beginning. "We've got a lot more work ahead of us, but it's exciting to see the progress. Now, let's make sure we keep this momentum." Elon leaned back in his chair, thinking about everything that had happened, how close they had come to losing it all. He thought about Jared's phone call, the pressure mounting from investors, the moments of doubt when he wasn't sure if he could continue. But through it all, there had been Ava. She had been the one to remind him why they started this journey in the first place. The door to the conference room opened, and one of the senior executives from Neuralink, David Lee, stepped in. "Elon, Ava," he said, his tone upbeat. "I've just received an update from Dr. Grayson's team. They're seeing incredible results with the new neural implants. Patients who were once unable to move any part of their body are now regaining small motor functions. We're finally seeing the proof we needed." Elon's eyes lit up. It was a moment he had dreamed of, an actual, tangible breakthrough that could change the world. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked, almost in disbelief. "The real thing?" David nodded. "Yes, and it's just the beginning. We're already working on expanding these treatments to other conditions, but the potential here is extraordinary." Ava's face softened with pride. "You were right from the start, Elon. This wasn't just about technology. It was about people." Elon looked out the window once more, his mind racing. "We've got to move fast. The potential is massive, but it's also dangerous." Ava nodded. "We need to be careful. People are excited about this, but they also fear it. The road ahead is going to be rocky. We can't let the hype overshadow the responsibility. We have to make sure this is used ethically." Elon knew she was right. The line between innovation and manipulation was thin, and as much as he wanted to push the limits of what Neuralink could achieve, he had to be mindful of the ethical implications. This was no longer just about ambition. It was about ensuring that what they had started would be a force for good, not harm. In the weeks that followed, Elon took a step back from the day-to-day operations to focus on the bigger picture. He knew that Neuralink had entered a new phase of its development, and with that came a new set of challenges. The technology was becoming more advanced, but so were the questions surrounding its use. There were debates about privacy, human augmentation, and the potential consequences of allowing technology to interface directly with the brain. He and Ava began to craft a framework that would ensure Neuralink operated within ethical boundaries. They would establish a board of advisors, experts in ethics, neuroscience, and technology policy, who would help guide the company's future decisions. One evening, as Elon was reading through a draft of the new ethical guidelines, he found a letter sitting on his desk. It was from Jared Wilkinson, the investor who had been so skeptical just months ago. The letter was short but clear. "Elon, I've been following the progress closely, and I must admit, I was wrong. Neuralink has shown it can deliver on its promises. I'm in for the long haul. Let's build this future together." A wave of relief washed over him. He hadn't realized just how much Jared's backing meant until that moment. Neuralink wasn't just surviving anymore. It was thriving. Months later, Neuralink began to receive accolades from both the scientific community and the general public. The technology had advanced enough to start treating conditions that were once thought irreversible. People who had been paralyzed for years were walking again. Others who had suffered from severe memory loss were beginning to recover their past. But more than that, Neuralink was becoming a symbol of what humanity could achieve. It was no longer just a tech company, it was a movement to improve lives, to expand human potential and to bridge the gap between the brain and the future. Elon stood once again on the balcony, but this time, he wasn't alone. Ava stood beside him, watching as the sun set over the horizon. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Elon looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We're not done yet, but we've come a long way." Ava chuckled softly. "You know, I never doubted we could make it, but I didn't realize just how far we could go." Elon turned to her, his gaze intense. "We're just getting started, Ava. We've only scratched the surface of what this technology can do." The world ahead was still uncertain, and there were countless challenges to overcome. But in that moment, as the first stars began to twinkle in the sky, Elon felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. They were on the right path. The road would be long, and the obstacles would be many, but they had made it this far, and that was all that mattered. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?